Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk about theology. Now, oftentimes people think of theology as this esoteric discipline that only qualified nerds ought to be able to traffic in and discuss, and only those who, you think of somehow the back room of some seminary study or a classroom or whatever. But the truth is that everyone is always doing theology. And theology is basically those thoughts you have about God, the divine, the supernatural, based upon what you consider to be your authoritative data. And so the authoritative data is what people choose from in order to line their dots in a row in certain categories. Those categories can sometimes be inherited from ancient philosophy. They've been, people have tried to rework those categories over time, but they always tend to come back to the major categories that your revealed data tends to emphasize. Well, specifically for the peoples of who have the major religions of with sacred text, like Islam, Judaism, Christianity, they have their sacred texts, and those categories tend to fall into predictable patterns regarding what you think God is like and what you think humans are like, and what's the interaction between, and are there angelic beings, and how is the world created, and so forth. There's various different categories that go into theology. And so, but speaking specifically of Christianity, those categories tend to fall into major emphasized categories found within the Bible. So, for example, obviously, your theology proper is what do you think about God? What is his nature? What's he comprised of? This doctrine of the Trinity, where did it come from? And why did ancient fathers determine that was the best explanation for all the data we have available? And then there's the doctrine of Christ, oftentimes called Christology, because a major key character in affecting redemption of the world. There's bibliology. There's even a theological category called anthropology, which is not the academic study of shared pattern human behavior across societies. No, the theological doctrine of anthropology is the study of the nature of mankind. What do we think is the makeup of humankind? What's their spiritual potential? What's their problem? Why might they need redemption? And what's their future? So all those sorts of different categories that have been used in theology. But the simple fact is people are constantly doing it all the time. If you ever talk to someone on the street and they say, well, I think people are basically good, that's a theological statement. If you ask them, well, what do you think God is like? And their eyes kind of go up and to the left because they're accessing that part of the brain that creates, that's creative. That means that, and they're making it up on the spot. I think God is like X. Well, based upon their authoritative data, which in many cases is their own experience, they're going to give you an assertion of what they think God is like. And so everyone's always doing theology in some capacity. Oftentimes, you either want to do that on purpose or you'll do it by accident. If you're doing it by accident, oftentimes your theology is being led around by forces that you're not evaluating, whether it's in media, music, reading, whatever. You are not thinking it through. That's most of us. Most of us oftentimes, very few of us actually are purposely thinking about our theology constantly, so therefore we're susceptible to the conditions around us. Nevertheless, theology is something that we're constantly doing. All of us always engage in it. And based upon the authoritative data you would draw from, whether it's authoritative data of a sacred text, but thanks to the 19th century philosophers that tended to make our personal experience more authoritative than anything else, there's many of us who our authoritative data is our experience, and we would never question our experience and never think for a moment that possibly our experience, based upon as we perceive it, could conflict with reality. Those are, those that can take you on down different interesting roads. But nevertheless, we're always doing theology. There's a systematic theology, which tends to focus on those preset categories and that are emphasized within your sacred text. Specifically for Christianity, it's the Bible. But then oftentimes that systematic theology is fine, and people can somewhat study that in isolation. You can buy a book on systematic theology, but that same type of theological packaging can really have a difficult time when it butts up against the practicalities of daily experience. And so when a person is thinking theologically about something and they think, well, how do I square that with what I'm experiencing in life and the way in which I have to live that out? That's oftentimes even given a category of practical theology, specifically for ministers. when you have to think about how you know what to be true actually plays out for people in real time. That's something you have to wrestle with. But I want to propose to you that systematic theology, as valuable as that is, and in many cases, clergy who are going through training must understand these things and study it thoroughly. As valuable as that is, and there is some value there, it really that value is limited because of how oftentimes you will engage in a religious life that, doesn't quite square with that. In fact, you may say you believe one thing, but actually practice another. For that very reason, oftentimes people will feel that sense of tension of, like, I say I believe one thing, but I'm in a community that really kind of really believes something else, really seems to practice something else. Well, I would submit to you that you really do believe what you do. That's what you really believe. You ever heard the phrase from someone, show me your checkbook and I'll show you what's important to you? Who uses checkbooks anymore? But still, no, you spend money on the things that you value, that you think are important, whether they be bills, luxuries, or anything else for that matter. So you basically put your money where your mouth is. So as a result, you actually do value what you go and spend on. And in a religious life, you actually do believe the things you practice. You may say, well, in my religious life, we're all about community. We really want to be a close-knit community. And yet you're in a situation where if you really study the various different, the words of the lyrics that you sing all the time, they're full of nothing but first-person personal pronouns. As a result, all your music really kind of reinforces this individual isolation from everybody else. And then, but yet you say it's not about me, it's about we. And yet, all your singing, and we've said this before, you don't just believe what you pray, but you pray what you sing. All those things you sing are all about you and your personal experience. As a result, there's a breakdown of the integrity there. What you're saying you value is different from what you're singing and what you're doing. And that goes into your architecture, your trappings, your surroundings, the way in which you interact with people, and the way you're all sitting and facing a central space. You could say, well, our worship is all about God, but in reality, everything about it is all designed to pull at the sentiments and heartstrings and the experience of the individual. And so as a result, you may have a room full of individuals all having their own individual experience, all the while saying, well, we're having a shared experience. No, well, again, you have to think about whether or not that actually matches what you say. What you're doing is actually matching what you say you believe. But I've often contended that you actually do believe what you do. And for that very reason, pay attention to what you do. Because your faith and your practice are so intertwined that I use the phrase Praxi Fide. Praxi Fide is a Latin term. It basically talks about the interweaving and interconnectedness of faith and your practice. It's not just that you believe what you do, but you also wind up doing, if you're careful, if you're conscious about it, you should wind up doing what you say you believe too. You want to have integrity there so that those things are congruent. They agree. But at the end of the day, many will oftentimes say, well, I want to have my theological ducks in a row. I really want to understand my systematic theology and be able to line up all those dots. Fine, that's valuable. But then I ask, well, how much time have you spent really diving into and paying attention to what is done at your church? Because what you do over time is actually teaching you that theology through the practice. If you pay attention over a long period of time, think of it in terms of a glacier. Glaciers cut deep but slow. And when you measure a thing geologically, you can't really watch its progress through with the naked eye. It takes a long time with time-lapse photography to be able to see its movement. Well, that's really how a church is supposed to operate on you, where over time, the Praxi Fide of that shared communal patterned affirmed in historic worship is having its effect on you over time, so that your theology is always being formed, possibly under the radar, without you possibly even noticing it and not being on purpose about it. that your theology is being formed through the practice. And so Praxi Fide is that way in which choose your arena carefully, because over time it is shaping what you believe. You think you're going to read a theology book and have all your theology in place before you begin worshiping with people. That's really not how it works. You choose who you're going to worship with, and then over time, that shapes your theology as you go. And therefore, the landscape looks totally different as that glacier marches on over time within your own heart. And therefore, choose your glacier wisely. Right? That's what I wanted to share today about Praxi Fide and why it is we dive into and stay connected to our local community, fully embedded into our local church, being absolutely ingrained, because over time, it's going to affect how you believe. And that theology that you wanted to read from a book has actually been filtering into your life throughout that time. That's all I have for today. God bless you. If you enjoyed this content, please hit like and subscribe, and we will keep it up.